David, it's been a busy time for SCOTUS, for the law. Um, I thought the Associated Press ruling was kind of an interesting one. That SCOTUS basically said, "Hey, you can't bar um, the Associated Press from the White House um, on basic First Amendment."
Well, I'm not sure that one went all the way
It
up.
wasn't SCOTUS. Yeah, I'm sorry. It went to sorry. Excuse me.
I
Correction. Go
think it
ahead.
was a
Yeah.
district court judge, and of course, we love to look at this. He was appointed by Trump, the
Yeah.
first Trump go round. He's in Washington D.C., and he basically said that even for these non-public places like the Air Force One and like at the White House, yes, they're non-public, but if you're going to give access to the press, you have to not have viewpoint discrimination. So some reporting service or wire service that takes a different viewpoint from yours, that would violate the First Amendment if you excluded them as president from either Air Force One or the White House. And so that put the Associated Press back on an even par with anyone else. It didn't assure them that they would get a favored position, but it assured them that they would not get a disfavored treatment on account of the fact that their viewpoint was different. And their viewpoint difference, you have to say, because this is also comical with Trump, they insist on calling it, as have geographers and map makers for hundreds of years, the Gulf of Mexico. Trump insists on calling it the Gulf of America. And for that, calling it the Gulf of Mexico. Now, people may ask, well, don't the New York Times, don't other reporting services also call it the Gulf of Mexico? They sure do. But the AP has a style book, which is extremely important and persuasive. And Trump was trying to bully them into changing the style book, and they kept it the Gulf of Mexico. So they're back on equal footing. Thank goodness their lawyers spent the money to do that. And they're just a great news organization. And it was just really reprehensible that they were treated so poorly, shabbily, and discriminated against. Now they won't be.
The other thing that arose this week was this question of the jurisdiction of judges. And this is something that we had touched on in your last visit, because when a judge rules against you, you really question the system of judgeships. And so in the case of this administration, when judges were ruling to block temporary injunctions against, for example, deportations, et cetera, these are done by federal judges across the spectrum geographically. That is, as you pointed out, the Texas judges tend to, you can judge shop for the judges that will rule for you, and you can judge shop on the opposition can for the judges that will go against the administration. So in this case, it was surprising to me that the House Republicans actually have approved this bill limiting the reach of federal judges. Can you just speak to this?
Well, Mark, it's quite hypocritical, but it's worth just a couple of minutes of background. When Trump, first time around, imposed the Muslim ban when he came into office, a Muslim from, or a person from a majority Muslim country, I think that was more of it, whether you were from any of these 6 or 7 Muslim countries that had, I guess, Islam as their official religion, or that were identified as, quote, Muslim countries. If you were from one of them, you couldn't come into any airport in America. You couldn't come into America. And so if you were going to challenge that, you could really go anywhere in America. So from the right wingers' point of view, well, of course, the people against the Muslim ban went right to the San Francisco Bay Area and got a liberal judge from the San Francisco Bay Area to say that it was illegal. And if it was illegal for Trump to bar entry into the United States anywhere, that was illegal. Well, why shouldn't she make, I think it was a she, why shouldn't that judge make a nationwide injunction? Why should you have to go airport to airport? Now, likewise, when the shoe was on the other foot with the Republicans, there's a medical abortion pill, which is the way that most women in America have abortions these days, by taking this very safe and effective pill. So when the right wingers wanted to ban it, where did they go? Amarillo, Texas. They found a district was worse than the Bay Area. They knew exactly what judge they were going to get, because there's only one judge in that little division of that district. and he was from some Bible banger organization, gotten on the court, 51-49 by all Republican votes. They knew exactly where to take it, and he issued a nationwide injunction against that pill. People freaked out, and that was actually taken up through the so-called emergency docket, and the U.S. Supreme Court took out of effect his nationwide injunction. So even though he ruled that way, and that was the ruling in that district or division in Texas, it was not the ruling throughout the country because it wasn't made nationwide. And then McConnell said something very interesting, Senator McConnell. He said, you Republicans don't get it. You're trying to do something about this problem when they tried to do something a year ago. We like these tiny little districts where we know who the judge is going to be, and we can judge shop our right-wing causes to mark these judges. We know who we're going to get. We know how they're going to rule. And of course, if you're one of the people who is for the medical abortion pill being disseminated and who knows that it's safe and that there's no reason under the law to bar it, this is an outrage, this judge shopping. Well, guess what? Now that Biden is not in office anymore, and Biden is not the one issuing executive orders, but Trump is, now the Republicans have suddenly decided that one of America's great problems is this judge shopping and finding these judges who issue these nationwide injunctions. And they don't want any more nationwide injunctions. Before there's going to be a nationwide injunction, they say there has to be a 3-judge court. And that's a normal solution. I wrote a law review article about that when I was on a California law review about in foreign affairs cases, there should be a 3-judge court. Generally, it's cumbersome, to get 3 judges together and all this kind of stuff. It's probably easier to do it this way, have 1 district judge, and then if you don't like it, you run right up to the Court of Appeals, and then you do get 3 judges, 3 appellate judges to review it. So this 3-judge court seems to be, we do it in some way called multi-district cases, but it's rare. It's not going to be enacted by the country because the Senate is going to have a filibuster of 60 votes, and they're never going to have 60 votes. But, all of these, Tea Party types, these right-wing types in the House, now they have a new cause célèbre, nationwide injunctions against Trump policies.
Yeah, as you say, the Senate it'll die. But it's interesting to me that they would even, that it would pass the House is extraordinary, I think. Maybe not within this environment, as you say.
4 votes. 4 votes, Mark. It's one of those 218, 214.
Yeah. So and as you say, it's a cause célèbre for them. There is something that went up to SCOTUS, and it was regarding the firing of federal employees. Can you speak to this? They rule that that they essentially the reinstatement of federal employees, which had been, I guess, ruled upon by a lower court, SCOTUS overruled that.
So in the summer of 1980, Mark, during the Carter administration, I was there in Washington, D.C., played on a softball team at the Department of Justice with a brilliant and hard-hitting lawyer, William Alsop, who went on to be a U.S. district judge in the San Francisco Bay Area. And William Alsop got this case at random. It was by these probationary employees. And he said, there's just no rationality to this. A probationary employee, first of all, isn't somebody who's been there a week or two. There's people who've been there a year and a half. Some of them have outstanding performance reviews. It is simply irrational and against the law to suddenly terminate 16,000 of these employees because they're quote probationary employees from 6 different agencies. One of them is the Department of Defense. So he ruled that they had to be reinstated. Because it was the San Francisco Bay Area, it went up to our West Coast Appellate Court, the Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit affirmed him and said, yes, that order goes into effect. You have to reinstate those 16,000 people. That's what went up to SCOTUS, and SCOTUS reversed that and did not reinstate the people. It doesn't mean that they won't be reinstated one of these days. It doesn't mean that under some different legal theory, Mark, they won't be reinstated. But under this order, they will not be reinstated because the U.S. Supreme Court said that they didn't show that on the merits they were going to win. And there's another question of whether they have to go not to a U.S. district judge, but they have to go to like the U.S. Court of Claims or to go to some other court which handles these, what am I trying to say? Are they these personnel matters?
So that's jurisdictional. Is that what you're saying, David?
Yes, the U.S. Supreme Court said that it was jurisdictional and it shouldn't be there. And on top of that, also that the particular plaintiffs didn't have standing. Now, this has really mystified people why they don't have standing, because I understand that they're the labor unions that represent these 16,000 people. Some of them may not have labor unions that represent them. When I was at the Department of Justice, we never had a labor union. The DAs have a labor union. That's one reason they could stand up to Gascon the way they did and not get scared about being fired, because they really have workplace protections in a way that they don't in the, in the FBI. Does not have a union. All these security agencies, like maybe the Department of Defense, are not allowed to have a union, but there ought to be somebody who stands up for those workers. If it's got to be some kind of union. So people are saying, well, wait a second, that's going to bar them from ever challenging it in the courts if their labor union representatives or people who speak for them, even though they don't have a union, if they can't speak up for these workers who are fired, these probationary federal employees, they're left without a remedy, because they're left without a key to the courthouse door. So people are really mystified by that. And the other thing, it's not inside baseball, because this case matters too. 5 of these 6 agencies are also bringing suit in Maryland, in the U.S. District Court in Maryland. That judge ruled the same way, that they had to be reinstated. Okay, so the Bay Area one also reinstates the Department of Defense people. The Maryland one reinstates the folks at 5 other agencies also covered in the San Francisco Bay Area case. That case went to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, which just overturned that judge 2-1. So you figured that case ought to go to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court, the other shoe may be about to drop on that whole issue of reinstating these probationary employees to the tune of over 10,000 human beings. But we're really in limbo trying to figure out, is the Fourth Circuit case now going to go to the Supreme Court? Are they going to have standing, those folks there? And then we can pretty much ignore the case here, because even if that case is worthless, the one from the San Francisco Bay, 5 of the 6 agency folks will be reinstated if that case goes to the U.S. Supreme Court from the Fourth Circuit in Maryland, and if they have standing. So we're waiting to see.
So just to run that out, then these people are still out of work.
Yes.
And they kind of just have to linger. They're waiting. I mean, so I think during this time, they're languishing in this we don't know kind of world, what our future is going to be, whether we get back to government or not. Many of them are probably turned off by the whole thing to begin with. I mean, they know that the government tried to fire them.
If they go to that personnel court, of course, the irony, like so many of the stupid, heedless things that Trump does and Musk, they would get back pay. So they would do no work.
Okay.
The 15,000 of them, we would get no work out of them, right? And meanwhile, they would get back pay for all of that time that they weren't working.
It's right on brand for Trump, right?
Exactly. You know what Trump hopes to do with all of this, okay, is not cut the federal budget. Anyone who believes that, they've really missed the show. The show is patronage. The show is the old spoil system. The show is to hire patriots, a la Trump, for all of those jobs, and to do just what they used to do in the big cities and just what they did before the reforms by Eisenhower of the federal system, which was to the victor go the spoils. And you hire all the Trumpsters, all the MAGA maniacs to all these jobs that used to be held by the deep state, except the MAGA maniacs on the best day don't have the experience, don't have the expertise that the people who they're getting rid of have. And that's true even of probationary people, some of whom, as I say, Mark, have been around for many months, have high performance reviews. So the idea that there's some apprentice who just came in, has no idea what they're doing. No, these are all experienced people. Almost all of them have high performance reviews, are doing a great job. They're going to be bounced out, and Trumpsters are going to be bounced in.
So well said. I mean, the fact that it's a misnomer, probationary, because they're not under contract to the government, and so that's the reason they can be discharged so quickly. But as you say,
this is a new thing, Mark. I was never a probationary employee at any of the jobs that I had in government. It's kind of a new thing.
Yeah, I guess it's when you're hired during this first 2 years, they consider you under this sort of probationary umbrella. But yeah, I wasn't familiar with it either until
Mark. Our commitment was for 3 years, so we went almost from the end of probation, if it's over 2 years, to the end of our commitment. A lot of people like myself, Adam Schiff, we stayed for a lot more than 3 years. You got much more interesting work as you stayed longer.
Adam Schiff wasn't on your softball team when you were playing there? No.
Adam is a very good tennis player. And he had other folks that he played tennis with out on the West Side. And I wasn't one of his favorite tennis partners. But as I said, I did, for a moment in time, I did supervise him on a case. That's what will be on my tombstone, supervised ship.
All right, let me get back to the Supreme Court.
Supervised ship.
Let me get to the Supreme Court and this notorious Salvadoran mega prison. These people, plucked out of American life and dropped into this mega prison under this 18th century law. Can you speak to the Supreme Court on this issue of and the reason I'm halting a bit is that I do think, I'm sure some of these guys were, maybe many of these guys were gang members, but we know at least 3 and maybe as many as 72 of those who were deported were not necessarily gang members, and so they were kind of just plucked and included in this deportation. Not to mention the fact that the judge's order to stop the deportation and to reverse the planes, it came in time before they had actually arrived in El Salvador, and now we're hearing nothing we can do. In any case, the Supreme Court has now weighed in on this. Can you speak to that?
Well, there is the contempt piece, and the contempt piece is that there are 3 planes that are taking off from Texas within the United States, and the matter is supposed to happen all before any judge could possibly react. The order is issued kind of secretly Friday night. They're going to be on a plane Saturday, but the pro bono attorneys for these plaintiffs, for these would-be deportees, are really on the ball. They learn what's going on. They file an emergency motion. They get a hearing on Saturday before this Chief Judge Boasberg, who's an old friend of Kavanaugh's. This idea that he's some big lefty, not at all. He's a friend of Kavanaugh's from Yale, who got picked for the Superior Court first by a Republican. I think it was
Bush, I believe.
Bush, right? By W. And then he got picked for the district court in Washington, D.C., which is also part of the federal system in Washington, D.C. He got picked by a Democrat. But, here's someone who, like the judge that I clerked for back there, who was first approved for the Superior Court by a Republican president and then approved because he was such a good judge, moderate, intelligent. He got picked for the U.S. District Court. So anyway, this Boasberg wanted to get to the bottom of it. So he said, look, while we're taking a look at this, everybody stop, turn the planes around. So it looks like what happened was that the government did not turn 2 of the planes around. They defied his order. And a 3rd plane took off from Texas, even though he said that this has to stop until we take a hard look at it. This is what they've stonewalled the judge about. They didn't answer questions straight on. Apparently, they've now, if I have this right, they've, I think, fired, the Department of Justice has fired or demoted or dismissed the 2 attorneys that are responsible for this litigation. And I think that's because, not because they did a bad job, but from what I understand, because they didn't toe the Trump line enough. When the judge said, I don't know what's going on, I don't understand it, how come you can't do something about this, get this back from El Salvador? Instead of towing the line, they were like, well, we don't understand it either. We've asked our superiors, what on earth is going on? They were sympathetic to the judge's question, as I think any intelligent advocate for the government would have been in that situation. Anyway, they weren't Trumpy enough, is what I understand it. We have to all follow that story and see what happens. But that would be quite a story, because the fellow that they've apparently dismissed has already distinguished himself for taking really Trumpy positions. The first Trump administration, he was the big advocate for the government for the Muslim ban. So, boy, his chickens would have come home to roost. All of those super loyalists for Trump, get ready, man. The leash is very short. You're spanking people today, and you're getting spanked by Trump tomorrow. So it looks like that may be the story with those 2. Anyway, so that's the contempt piece of it. And now the government has said that these are state secrets. Whether planes are taking off from Texas are apparently state secrets, although they've taken off weeks before. We've already lampooned the fact that they're talking about war plans that are imminent on a group chat, but this is apparently something that has to be kept as a state secret. Anyway, the case has gone up to the Supreme Court, and they've said sensibly, Mark, and this is what I understand that they've done, although they haven't granted any relief yet that really matters, but they have made the obvious point that there has to be due process before people are deported in this fashion. Every first-year law student knows there has to be due process. It's nice to know that a majority of the Supreme Court says there has to be due process. These particular people weren't given due process. And all
Well, I
that
mean, this one guy, Abrego Garcia, who was deported on March 15th, he was going to be returned, and now we heard from the administration that they couldn't get him returned. He was there, and it's too late, and now he's in El Salvador's custody. But
if the Supreme Court, Mark, if the Supreme Court buys this, I'm taking a long time to get to this point, which is
right.
There's like 3 or 4 critical points about this case. One of them is that this is absurd. This really is Kafka-esque, because he doesn't have to be someone with a court order, which he is, that a federal judge specifically said he could not be deported. So they've made an administrative error and deported to El Salvador someone who a federal judge said cannot be deported. That's bad enough. That's another part of this sort of contempt piece of all of this. But if this is true for him, it's true for you and me, Mark. If it's true that there's no jurisdiction and there's no way to prevent this once you're physically in a prison in El Salvador, why do we have a remedy? They'd say the same thing. Oh my goodness, we can't actually do this. And of course, the reason that this is so unbelievable, so unfair, is because imagine if it were the judge's family member. Judge, I'm really sorry. We deported a family member of yours to another country, and there's just really nothing we can do about it. We haven't really called them on the phone or really hectored them or made a big deal about it. We've done everything that we can. Would anybody believe this if it were a family member for somebody in the Trump administration? This was all they could do to get them back from El Salvador, is throw their hands up in the air and say, well, now that the person's in El Salvador, no, we really can't get Ivanka back from a big mistake. She was standing there, and we put Ivanka on the plane. We meant to put the guy on. There's all a huge confusion. Now she's in El Salvador. We can't get her back. Your Honor, we just can't get her back. We've done everything that we can, but we can't get Ivanka back. We can't get this one back. Nobody would believe that for a minute. So this idea that it's so futile, they haven't even really tried. They can't push El Salvador around. Of course, there's all the reason to believe, Mark, that's exactly what we've been doing, is pushing El Salvador around. We twisted their arm. We bribed them.
How do you think that we ended up being able to send these people to El Salvador to begin with? We run the show. I mean, the idea somehow that the tail wags the dog? No, I don't think so. We're the dog. But the court, this John Roberts court, I'm always hearing about how John Roberts cares so much about his legacy and blah, blah, blah. And I mean, you guys know more about this stuff than I do, but I think he's kind of gone halfway on a lot of things when he talks about the impeachment of judges. That seemed as though, the absurdity of impeachment of judges, how that's wrong, when that was being spoken of. But he didn't say you have to honor a judge's order. An order from the bench is something that has to be adhered to. He didn't say that. So I was really, in a way, as I say, I thought he was kind of tepid in the way that he defended the rule of law. And so to this case, you end up with this guy who may still be alive, maybe not, in this horrible prison down in El Salvador. And he's just one of many down there who need jurisprudence to weigh in on whether or not they're actually members of this gang. But in any case, Roberts and his court actually allowed an extension on the amount of time, didn't they, David? On the amount of time before any kind of rule, and before this guy had to be returned.
There is something called an administrative stay, and the Chief Justice, or the justice who's responsible for a particular district around the country, and Roberts was perfect for this because he's the justice for the District of Columbia, and he's also the Chief Justice. So he could make this decision on his own. And this one, I actually support him on this one, Mark. I'm a fan of his. I know he's a deep conservative, disagrees with me on lots and lots of issues, starting with Citizens United, starting with the gun decisions like Heller, the discrimination cases, the voting discrimination cases like Shelby County. He's a hard conservative, but I think he's a rational, intelligent person. I think he does care about his legacy. So we can criticize him on some other things, perfectly properly. But on this one, Mark, I think that all he's doing is maintain the status quo for a week. And while it's true that someone might be killed in that prison, if you think about it, it's sort of unlikely, as horrible as it is. And if you order him back here, first of all, the order is fraught because, as I said, it's kind of ridiculous. They would have had Ivanka back here in 10 minutes if it had happened to her. But it is a little fraught. Who do you hold in contempt? Do you issue an order down there against somebody in El Salvador? It's not respected. That's even worse. Now federal judges have issued orders. They're not respected. So there's a kind of a right way to do this. And Roberts is thinking, what's the right way to do this? How do we approach this thing? And sort of the balance of equities to go through all of that to bring him back within a day or two, which is what basically Judge Boasberg had ordered. As opposed to, let's have a week to think about it. Maybe I can get 5 votes, Roberts is thinking, to do something sensible and get the person back here. I just think we can talk about the balance of equities in some of the other cases. But I think in this one, he kind of got it right. And my instinct is that this fellow will be brought back here. It's so lawless. His case is so sympathetic. I think at some point, either Trump
he was a green card holder, wasn't he?
Yes. At some point, I think Trump is going to say there was a huge mistake. I fired these 2 people. I can't believe this, and have a big thing. Meet him at the airport, right? Meet him at the airport.
That'll never happen.
or this guy. No, this guy in El Salvador will want to reinvent himself as a great humanitarian with all these people that he's got in this hellhole. Why shouldn't he stand there with this guy, with the wife, and say there was a mistake? El Salvador solved it. And
when was the last time you said that you heard Trump say there was a mistake?
Well, he just basically said it yesterday. I mean, the market. You have a lot of guests who talk about.
He didn't say there was a mistake. He just changed policy. But you're right. You're right. And
what
I don't mean to laugh, but it just seemed like it just seems almost cartoonish. And maybe I don't know. I think he's
Senator Schiff has demanded an investigation of insider trading, because the way that all happened, as you say, maybe he didn't say those exact words, but it was obvious that there was a mistake, and he couldn't live with it anymore, because people were, in a nutshell, not only had the stocks collapsed and all these people's retirement accounts and all these Republicans and all these rich people were freaking out over Trump being in office. But also people weren't investing in America. People should have said, the stock market's gone down. I'm buying treasury bills. I'm investing in America. Trump had so burned our image with the world and so run our country down that people weren't investing in America.
That's right.
And they weren't buying treasury bills. And when that happened, that's when the Secretary of Treasury went to Trump and said, this really is, we're like in Smoot-Hawley territory. People don't have any confidence in America anymore, not just our stock market. They don't have confidence in the American financial system. And that's when he changed course. And of course, Schiff wants to know who made money, because a lot of people knew in the hours before he suddenly encouraged people to buy that there was going to be a change of policy, and you could make a huge, stock market went up 3,000 points. There was a lot of money to be made, and people want to know. And just because they got rid of the inspectors general mark doesn't mean you can't get to the bottom of it. There are very good stock trading records, and they can find out who sold and bought when.
I was talking about this in the first hour, and I love that you brought it up again. But I have to say, David, with Pam Bondi running justice, I don't think you're going to. I think it's great that Schiff is talking about this, but I think there's no cop on the beat anymore.
There got to be some states, Mark. I've said this every time I'm on your show that we bring up this topic. The states have to come in and fill the vacuum. Yes, there's lawlessness. There's no enforcement. And, I'm a former prosecutor. And, I believe in this idea of deterrence. I always have. I always will. That if you don't deter people, they'll commit crimes. There's the line. I had cooperated with the government, explain eloquently that line between fear and greed. And a lot of people are way over on the greed side if there's no fear of prosecution. But there could be prosecution in the state courts. The states could take it seriously. And I keep telling you, I know California, New York, we need to spend money on other things. But every time Trump abandons the playing field, we ought to occupy the playing field. If he fires FBI agents with experience, we ought to hire them here in California to be in our California Bureau of Investigation. If he doesn't investigate insider trading, okay, you've swindled the person. The person that you've got, you have a transaction with a person, the person who didn't know what the stock market was going to swing up 3,000. If you knew that it was on inside information, you've swindled that person. These are, these can be prosecuted in the state courts. But I also say, Mark, that even with Bondi there, at some point, it's so clear. The front page of the New York Times says, Elon Musk's minions they claim they're doing pro bono work and helping with government efficiency. They made $7 million on trades at 11 a.m. yesterday. That's very hard to ignore, and it's very hard to go on with a normal life after the New York Times has painted you with proof that you're a thief.
I love that you mention it. I'd love to see them nailed. It just seems as though maybe there's some reputational damage. I don't know. It may be lost in everything else. And um,
Mark, one last thing.
Yeah.
Trump won't be in there for more than 3.5 years. The statute of limitations is 5 years. The statute of limitations is
I
5
see.
years.
Okay.
And
All
there's
right.
someone
Yeah.
in office for 3.5 more years.
So he can only kill the clock
what?
for so long. Yeah.
Exactly.
So how old will he be at that point? How old will he be at that point, David?
You can't run out that clock. And there won't be a third term. Bet your money. Katz and Thomas, put the guy up with the beard.
No third term for Trump.
Says right here on your show, breaking news, he will never serve a third term.
All right, my last thing with you, because it is something that dovetails with something you were talking about before. You were saying, like, hey, it could happen to any of us. Any of us could be plucked up and sent to a Salvadoran prison, and et cetera. This just of yesterday, President Trump ordering the Department of Justice to investigate 2 former officials from his first administration, including one of whom that he accuses of being guilty of treason. This is in a memo signed in the Oval Office, and it'll be for Miles Taylor, the ex-Homeland Security official, and he wrote under an anonymous, remember he wrote that, I think it was a piece for the New York Times, an opinion piece under the, just calls himself anonymous. He was within the administration. He described himself as part of the resistance to the president at the time. And it is said, this is from yesterday in the memo that Trump signed, his conduct could properly be characterized as treasonous and as possibly violating the Espionage Act. America is headed down a dark path, said Taylor, and never has a man so inelegantly proved another man's point, he wrote. So he and one other person named Chris Krebs. He's the former cybersecurity and infrastructure security agent who was fired after he pushed back on the bogus claim of the 2020 election fraud. So those 2 are now being investigated by the Justice Department as potentially guilty of treason. Can you speak to this?
Well, he pushed back, Krebs did, based on evidence and a comprehensive understanding and analysis of what had happened in the election, and said there has not been the fraud that's been ballyhooed around. He's really an American hero, because you remember that Trump's plan and what he said on the phone call down to Georgia, his own voice, taped, he didn't know it was going to be taped. Trump is taped saying that you just find me another 12,000 votes or something. And he also said that just to when he tried to push that lower down Clark, that Jeffrey Clark, who was like number 6 in the Department of Justice, he tried to vault him to the top. And the deal with the devil there was that he just say that there was fraud down in the Georgia election. And then Trump said, my Republican Congress members will take it from there. So Krebs was a huge hero because he stood up, a Republican. He stood up and said, based on the evidence, there has not been any foul play or anything with these elections. And I think he got fired and he got derided after that. But the point is that this is really scary. And as an attorney, I kind of wonder what I would do if someone like Krebs or this fellow Miles came into my office. And I guess what you do is you watch anything that would be a normal process, like the first subpoena for information that goes out, the first information request. If you hear about it, you run to the judge and you say, this is selective prosecution. You want total transparency of, how this thing got started. If it's a tax investigation, you don't just assume that it's going to be a mere audit. You want to get to the bottom of all of that. And I think with this record, a judge would back you up. Now, selective prosecution means that you're treated differently from other people in the same situation. They've certainly been treated differently from other people in the same situation, because if you're a target of a federal investigation, it's not announced by the president. It's not broadcast to the world. So my hope would be, if I had such a client, that Trump was simply being bombastic and ballyhooing this thing, because that's what he does. It's performative. And at the end of the day, no one at the Department of Justice would risk their bar card and everything else to follow up on this. Because there seems to be absolutely no basis to bring these people up on any kind of charges, Mark, or open an investigation. This Miles guy, you have a right to say I'm part of the resistance. I mean, they're
Sure.
going to go through and find every single person while Biden was in office, every single person in the government who said, I'm part of the resistance to Biden. I'm not really buying this Biden thing. You know, the border's open. I don't like DEI. All those people are guilty of treason. It's just ridiculous. And I got to say one more thing about Trump, if you don't mind. That, you know, you could say this whole economic calamity that he's just caused, who has helped? Like Russia. Who has really helped in all of this? Why is he always doing things that helps Russia? And meanwhile, he runs around doing all these things that really help Russia and showing that Trump is in the pocket of Russia. Maybe he's still dreaming about a Moscow Trump hotel or something like that. And he calls other people treasonous. It is so that it's just obnoxious. But if I represented one of those two people, that's what I'd do, Mark, is I would track everything that happened and I would run right to the judge and say, this is selective prosecution. You should quash this subpoena. You should not allow this to happen. You should inquire into it in open court.
Inlays says, I hope the first thing you would do, David Katz, is take the case. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, 500 law firms have filed this amicus brief on behalf of Wilmer Hale, Jenner
Sure.
and Block, the law firms who are fighting it. So I think that, you know, not all lawyers are about the money. You know, a lot of lawyers are about taking cases. And I think that so many of those law firms, over 500 of them, made it really clear that they, you know, they want to make money. Of course, they want to make money. But they also do care about, you know, the impact they have on society and the rule of law. And I think most attorneys would take that case right now. The huge firms do have the problem when you have 2,000 lawyers, they become huge businesses like other businesses. And I think a lot of them are thinking, I don't want to have my income fall from $5 million to $3 million because we took 2 or 3. They think, why don't legal aid? Send it to legal aid. Why do you make those people part of the firm? Let's give $1 million to legal aid. Legal aid, go do it.
No, you explained it. I think you explained it a couple of weeks ago that, you know, these big corporate law firms, it's, you know,
the guy at Paul Weiss, he quit. The head of pro bono at Paul Weiss quit. He doesn't want to find causes that Paul Weiss agrees with Trump on, that they want to do pro bono work for, and he went back to legal aid. That's what he did. He went back to legal aid. God bless him.
Zero Sum says there's got to be a constitutional amendment about presidential power in the next Democratic administration. Well, I mean,
what would it say? Well, what does Zero Sum want that constitutional amendment to say? You can never get a constitutional amendment through, Mark.
Yeah,
that's one problem.
Yeah, those ships have sailed, huh? Haven't they? Yeah.
There needs to be a new ruling. There needs to be 11 or 13 members of the Supreme Court, and they need to reverse that presidential immunity case. That was
I'd love to see the court expanded. Love to see the court expanded.
And seeing how it's actually worked out. This idea that between the pardon power and presidential immunity for anything that smacks of an official act, you really can have things like sending SEAL 6 out there to kill your political opponent and then pardoning the SEAL 6 members. And the Supreme Court, if they were really being diligent and smart about this, they didn't think that through because they left that horrible out there. You know, in law school, we always say, well, wait a second, your solution would allow that horrible result. What's your response to that? They didn't seem to have any response to that horrible.
Exactly. And it was argued by Sotomayor, I think. I mean, she actually drew that out. So you could kill your, as you say. CC Ryder says, this is a preemptive flex move by Trump to current staff. Oh, that's very, very good. I like that take. Do not write tell-all books is what CC Ryder is saying. Trump is essentially saying by declaring Miles Taylor an enemy of the state, you know, and guilty of treason. That's interesting. I mean, a lot of this stuff is a brushback pitch, you know. I mean, it's designed to cow any opposition within his administration, within the legislature, within Congress, within the Senate, et cetera. So
I bet you Miles got signed up by Random House for a couple of $1 million for his book right now. And that
he may need to break some of that off for legal fees.
I don't think any of those people, I don't think either of those two are in trouble. I think that, like I said, the Trump regime will be over 3.5 years, and I think the reign in Congress is over in 1.5 years. I think that that's very clear. Then there'll be huge investigations of all of this, and there'll be nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Kash Patel's got the whip hand right now. He's got the whip hand right now. You watch how long that's going to last. If he starts going after people like this Krebs and this Miles guy on no evidence at all, except Trump say so. And I've said this before, Mark, you know, they say what goes around comes around. The Democrats and the people who believe in the rule of law can never do this to the other side, what they're trying to do right now to people like Miles and Krebs. It's never going to be, a Democratic president going to come in 3.5 years and say, now we're going after them. I'm going to do just like Trump. I'm going to announce that you ought to be indicted. That's never going to happen with the Democrats. But the courts, and I think public opinion, are going to save people like Miles and Krebs. You're right. They have to spend some money on attorneys' fees, but at the same time, they're heroes. They're heroes, Mark. That's a big deal.
It's a complicated playing field, and the one thing that Trump has shown Democrats is that you can do a lot as president, and you can do a lot with a party that closes ranks behind you. And I don't think Democrats realize that. Democrats are always looking at the parliamentarian. Democrats are always looking at, we have to mollify this part of our coalition. We have to get the Joe Manchins of the world on board. It's a very, a charismatic figure like Trump. I mean, again, the Mad King for sure. But he does show you the power. If you can consolidate it, you could do it and use that power for good.
Well, Mark, I'm your moderate centrist, all of those kinds of things that some people think are all those dirty words, but moderate centrist rule in this country. Look at all the things that we've achieved, not this extreme weird thing that we have right now. And hopefully we won't have a weird extreme thing when the Democrats come back into power. You look at Biden, he got no credit at all because he fumbled during the debate and he was older and they lampooned him on Fox night after night. But the economy was roaring. We were the envy of all of these countries in the world. Employment was up. There was respect for people's rights. These cases went through the courts, and sometimes the courts ruled against Biden. But we had it so good, and we're going to have it so good again. And this thing that Trump does, it's not anything that we want to emulate. This is a disaster.
Of course. Well, I take that point. You don't want to emulate it from the standpoint of repudiation and revenge. But I think when it comes to using power for good, I'd like to. And you're right. I mean, sadly, David, this is a bit of a digression from the pure law, but I know you do a lot of political analysis as well. But I would just suggest to you that this is a media environment now and a political environment that overlaps the media environment in which you have to express yourself in the right way. Messaging is critical. So the fact that, and you'll forgive me, that Biden, I'm going to use the word bumbled through a lot of them because he struggled to speak effortlessly. It wasn't his fault. Older man, etc. And I've said it, and I'll say it again. I'd take Biden on a hospital gurney before Donald Trump. Okay, so I don't care. Oh, but he can't speak. He doesn't know where he is. I don't care. He's still my president. I mean, over the alternative. So
it used to be called a blue dog Democrat. So you're
hey, love our time together. Thanks for extended time today. Thanks, David
Good being
Katz.
with you. Always a pleasure.
All
Say
right,
hi to Kim, Albert, everyone.
Albert, Kim. Thanks, David. See you soon.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.